I'm just curious, have you guys just stopped making plans for the weekend, knowing that invariably there will be some major political news that breaks sometime between Saturday evening and Sunday afternoon?
I have canceled many trips in the past few months.
Oh, no.
Yeah, we have just sort of come to the understanding that there will be limited travel beyond campaign travel.
Isaac, I was thinking about you because the announcement of Biden dropping out of the race was your birthday weekend.
Well, luckily, I don't cover the Democrats.
Welcome to The Campaign Moment. It's Friday, August 2nd. I'm Martine Powers, one of the hosts of Post Reports. And this week, my usual counterpart, senior politics reporter Aaron Blake, is on a well-deserved vacation. So instead, I'm joined by two of the Post's top political reporters. First, we have Isaac Arnsdorf, who covers former President Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. Isaac, hello.
Hi, Martine.
And we also have with us today White House reporter Tyler Pager. Tyler, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So later in today's show, we're going to talk about the enthusiasm bump for Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign. And we're also going to touch on her search for a running mate, which to me feels like the most likely target of a thing that's going to ruin everyone's weekend this coming weekend.
Well, we're prepared. And as we've discussed, few weekend plans outside of work for the next few months.
Probably wise. But I want to start by talking about what Donald Trump was up to this week. He is getting a lot of attention for an appearance that he made on Wednesday at NABJ. That's the annual convention for the National Association of Black Journalists, which I stupidly decided this year that I wasn't going to go because I was too busy covering election stuff and feeling profound FOMO right now. But he was interviewed there by a panel of journalists from ABC, Semaphore, Fox News. And specifically, he made news with comments that he made about Vice President Harris's racial identity. And let's just hear a little bit of what he said.
She was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black.
And, I just want to be clear here for people who don't know a ton about Harris's background. She is both Indian and black. Her dad is a black Jamaican who immigrated to the U.S., and she has long participated in black institutions. She attended Howard and HBCU. She joined a black sorority. I don't know how much more you need to do to, qualify her blackness. And I think that's what I imagine a lot of people in that audience were reacting to, this idea that she had not performed her blackness in a way that was adequate in Trump's eyes. But I'm just curious what you guys made of that moment.
Well, there have been a few instances in the campaign where Trump has taken himself into territory that was less than universally adoring, which is his default. For a long time, he wouldn't go anywhere that wasn't his own venue, his own rally full of cheering fans. And so it's a risk whenever he does that. And this one kind of turned out to be especially explosive and came at a moment when he was already ramping up attacks on Harris that a lot of people are viewing as racist and sexist, and putting himself in front of some really serious journalists for some serious interviews. The campaign tried to spin it afterward as discrediting the interviewers, discrediting the media, which is kind of what they always do. But I think that's probably not the takeaway that most people who are going to encounter those clips are going to have from seeing what he said.
Just to add on to what Isaac's saying, I think it's a reflection of how much the race has changed that he would even go to a venue like this to take questions from serious reporters.
And I'm actually curious about that, why he did go, because I was also surprised by that.
Absolutely. I was stunned that he would go and do that. But I think, there's a lot of energy and excitement, and I know we're going to get to this later, about the vice president's campaign. And I think this was an opportunity, potentially, Isaac and our other colleagues have been writing about the effort from the Trump campaign to really define Vice President Harris. They have been running a campaign totally centered on Joe Biden, his age, and their argument that he was unable to serve as president for another 4 years. So this is a critical window for them to sort of define Harris as they wanted to, which was this liberal, ultra-liberal, soft on the border, soft on crime. And they wanted to make it a policy argument and attribute the country's failings to her vision for leadership. And that's not at all what he did. And it's sort of interesting, I think, back to the debate. And one of the aims of that debate was for Biden to prosecute the case against Trump, to make the argument about why he was not, an effective president and really turn it on him. And all the attention turned to Biden. And in some interesting ways, I see a similar dynamic here where Trump was supposed to make this about Harris, her record, her policy. And like Trump often does, it was just about Donald Trump and the sort of very offensive comments he made about Black Americans.
I think the other thing going on here is a few months ago in the campaign, the Trump campaign was talking a big game about making inroads with voters of color, particularly Black men. And so Trump was going to a Black church in Detroit and going to SneakerCon and doing things to try to make that point that they weren't afraid of going to places where Republican presidential nominees wouldn't historically go. And so you could see this as sort of a little bit of a holdover of that, but I think it's pretty clear since his selection of J.D. Vance as his running mate, and since the Democrats replaced Biden with Harris at the top of the ticket, that no one seriously thinks that the Republican path is running through Black men and voters of color anymore. It's clearly trying to strengthen their vote with white, non-college educated voters in the blue wall states of the upper Midwest.
Before we move on from this, I do want to point out a few other things that Trump said during this NABJ interview, beyond just his comments specifically about Harris's racial identity. He talked about how he would pardon participants in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. He said that he would close the border on his first day in office. And he made some comments basically defending the Supreme Court's decision overturning Roe v. Wade.
Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, everybody wanted abortion brought back. They didn't want Roe v. Wade in the federal government. They wanted it. Everybody
but the
wanted
majority
it
of
back.
Americans oppose.
So what stood out to you guys about what else was brought up in this interview?
Well, it wasn't just pardoning participants in the January 6th attack on the Capitol, which he said before. It was that Rachel Scott asked him specifically about...
And that's Rachel Scott from ABC, who is one of the moderators of this.
Asked him specifically about people who attacked police officers, and he still said yes.
I think one of the challenges with Trump and one of the advantages he has is he says so much that oftentimes a lot of his comments that would be five-alarm fires for any other political candidates just sort of fall by the wayside and people forget. Trump says so many incendiary and controversial comments that it's often hard to know what's going to stick, what's going to impact.
That they kind of like cancel each other out after a while.
There's just so much that even people that cover him every day, it's hard to keep track of everything he says because there's so much. It's just a fire hose and often of incendiary comments that people say are sexist and racist. And so it's just... in some ways, it's an advantage that he has as a politician is that when you spread so many falsehoods, it's just hard to catalog them all for the regular American voter.
But one thing I'm curious y'all's take on is if you feel like that is ramping up again now. It felt like, especially around the time of the debate, that this was a moment where it felt like Trump was more on message because there was so much emphasis on Biden and his age and his inability to articulate understandable ideas. I wonder, with the dynamic of the race changing, and now he's up against Harris and is clearly trying to figure out what messages, what attacks against her are going to stick, that he's throwing a lot at the wall and that you're seeing some of like past Trump and the more incendiary stuff start to come out in a new way again.
One of the biggest mistakes that the media makes is writing stories that Donald Trump's tone has changed or he's going to do a strategic reset and become a different person. We saw some of these stories in the lead up to the convention after the attempted assassination. Then he went and spoke at the convention and went through his laundry list of grievances, and we didn't see much change. So he is still the same sort of bombastic politician that just says whatever he wants. But I do think the narrative that Trump is a changed person is one that you're always going to be wrong if you publish.
There is a method to the madness in the sense that, I was not at NABJ for obvious reasons. I was, but I was at, he had another rally later that day in Harrisburg, and I was there to cover that. And right after he made those comments, falsely questioning Harris's racial identity, they started putting up articles on the big screen in the arena that were identifying her as Indian American rather than Black, to double down on that point. And then in that speech, he didn't say anything that would make new headlines to detract from that. And this has been described to me as intentional by Trump aides as you don't step on your own story. They're looking to dominate one news cycle at a time, every news cycle. So he is exercising some control over when he is throwing out outrageous things in order to take the spotlight and when he's not. That's not a comment on whether he wins those news cycles by dominating them, right? His instinct is kind of always to dominate them, always to grab the spotlight, whether he's doing that in a way that is gaining him support or further inflaming and polarizing and dividing is a constant question.
Mm-hmm. There are a couple other pieces of news in Trump world that I just want to touch on pretty briefly. And one of those is Project 2025. So there was this announcement this week that the leader of Project 2025 was stepping down. And this was an effort led by the Conservative Heritage Foundation to essentially make a blueprint for the next Republican administration, what they want to achieve on day one. Democrats started glomming onto this and running ads pointing out some of the things that this group was advocating for, like getting rid of the entirety of the Department of Education. The Trump campaign started to distance itself from Project 2025 and said that they had nothing to do with it. So the fact that this project has it seems like it is no longer going to be a thing. Isaac, what do you make of that? Is that significant? Is there something to read into all this?
Technically, what happened this week with Project 2025 was always going to happen in the sense of the policy side of the operation was done. The book, their playbook of all the things they wanted to do agency by agency was already published. And those were all recommendations that were served up and available for the official transition whenever it starts. The wrinkle was that the director ended up leaving, and kind of everyone tried to take that as an opportunity to serve their own purposes. So the Trump campaign tried to take the W on, this is what happens when you mess with us. We told you to stop talking with us, and, basically good riddance. And Heritage was also trying to take that opportunity to smooth things over with the Trump campaign and make it look like they had gotten the message and they were going to stop. And then the Democrats, for their part, were, smelling blood in the water and viewing this as a sign that their attacks were working and they were not going to stop talking about Project 2025. Mm-hmm. So
are they going to stop talking about Project 2025 now? I mean, I'm curious
about that.
No, absolutely not.
They're taking the W too.
And to them, it's a distinction without a difference. The document is public and they can continue to tie it to Trump.
And the message is whether or not Trump acknowledges the connection to this, this is the outline of what it will look like if Trump is elected president, and here's why you shouldn't vote for him.
Absolutely, and they found it to be quite effective.
The reason that Project 2025 and Trump's agenda became used interchangeably was because Trump is not a details person and was not super specific about how he would implement the things that he was talking about doing in a second term. And so it was natural to look at the more specific plans that were put on paper by the people who worked for him in the first term and would probably work for him again in the second term. And then when the Trump campaign saw the negative attention that was generating, that's when they tried to distance themselves. But the example that you gave, for instance, eliminating the Department of Education, that's come out of Trump's own mouth. There's a lot of overlap between what Trump has said he wants to do and what Project 2025 spells out the nitty-gritty for how they would implement.
Well, that's what I find interesting about all the conversation around this is that, to me, it feels like you don't have to look at Project 2025's 900-page document to understand what another Trump presidency would look like. Just listen to what Trump says out loud.
But it's much easier when it's all written out in paper and you can just snip it from the document and run it in ads and quote directly from it.
Some of us are indeed visual learners, and so it helps. All right. Before we take a break, I just want to point out one other story that we at the Post are reporting today. I know, Isaac and Tyler, this is not your reporting, and so you can't really speak to it. But the Post has new exclusive reporting about a secret federal investigation that went on for 3 years and was ultimately closed. The investigation was into whether Trump took money from the government of Egypt. And this revolves around a $10 million withdrawal of cash. The withdrawal was linked to Egypt's intelligence service and happened 5 days before Trump became president in 2017. So our colleagues Aaron Davis and Carol Lennig wrote this piece. I urge you to go read it. It's so fascinating. It's incredibly extensive reporting based on thousands of pages of government records, including sealed court filings and exhibits. I encourage you to read it. We'll have a link to that exclusive reporting in our show notes and at postreports.com. Okay, we're going to take a break there, and when we come back, we're going to unpack the enthusiasm bump for Vice President Harris and ask the question of how long is this honeymoon period going to last? We'll be right back. All right, so now I want to turn to Vice President Harris. Today was a big day for her campaign. She has now secured a majority of the pledged delegates to the 2024 Democratic National Convention, which means she is officially the Democratic Party's presidential nominee. And just in these last couple of weeks since Biden announced that he wouldn't be seeking re-election, Harris's campaign has raised so much money. They put out an announcement this morning that they raised $310 million in July, more than double Donald Trump's total from last month, which was already a really good month for Trump financially because, after he was almost killed, donations were pouring in for him. But the fact that Harris has now raised so much money, how big of a deal is this?
I mean, it's huge, both from a sign of enthusiasm and from an operational perspective. The Biden campaign had a huge cash advantage heading into the last few months, and Trump had overtaken them. And there was going to be some serious problems if Biden stayed in the race after that disastrous debate and they were unable to make up some of the cash falls that they were having as attributable to this lack of enthusiasm about Biden. And so I think it's hugely helpful in terms of running a robust campaign with less than 100 days until Election Day. But it also is a real reflection of how much energy and enthusiasm there now is behind Kamala Harris. This is something that Democrats have been lacking. We've talked about this on the show many times. Polls have shown for years that Democrats were not enthusiastic about Joe Biden running for president again. The majority of them said they thought he was too old. And so the fact that there's new energy, a new candidate, a younger candidate, someone that is going to aggressively campaign and campaign in a very different style. Our colleague Matt Visor wrote a really interesting piece today about just how different Kamala Harris's rallies are than Joe Biden or other Democrats. The music that she plays, the types of celebrities that are now interested and engaging with her.
Megan Thee Stallion?
Yes. So there's just a huge amount of energy and these rallies being packed with thousands of people. I've covered Joe Biden since 2019. He never had that sort of energy and enthusiasm. They would...
Except in Ireland.
except in Ireland. But they would set up events in a way that made it look like the room was full, but it wasn't, just because that's the best that they could do. He never had these big outdoor rallies that Trump has. And I think it is just a remarkable shift.
But here's my question, and Isaac, I'd be curious your thoughts on this. Obviously, this points to the idea that Democrats are really excited about Harris, and that you can imagine Democrats who were feeling apathetic about this election suddenly deciding, okay, it's Harris and it would be historic. I want to vote for her. Like there's the memes are telling me to vote, so I got to vote. But when we talk about swing voters, when we talk about double haters, like people who have felt exasperated, not just by Trump and Biden, but by Republicans and Democrats in general, or by like the political situation, the many people who have said, look, I don't like either party and I just feel like this whole thing is pointless, so why should I bother? Like, how much of this is filtering through to those people in the middle that we know would also have to vote for Harris if she's going to win?
Well, suddenly there are a lot fewer double haters. Just because Harris is a lot less well-known, a lot less defined, a lot less pre-baked than Trump and Biden. I mean, she's not that well established as who she is. And her campaign is trying to reintroduce her at the same time that the Trump campaign is trying to figure out how to define her, like what attacks on her are going to connect. It doesn't really seem like they know the answer to that yet. And these decisive swing voters, some of them are very high information. The high information voters you sort of think about as like people who really don't want to vote for Trump. And a lot of them were struggling with being comfortable with Biden as an alternative. And they're giving Harris a serious look whether they can get there with her or not. And then the undecided voters who just follow politics less, it's more that question of who is Kamala Harris to them.
Mm-hmm. I also think it's important to note Kamala Harris is still probably losing this race. I think there's been so much energy and enthusiasm among the Democratic Party that I've heard from some officials working on the campaign that they're like, hey, this is great, but it's still a super close race. And we're probably losing at this point. They feel much better about Harris's path forward than they did Biden's. But I think that's because
it was clear before that Biden was really losing this race.
And even before the debate, Biden was losing the race. And so after the debate, he was losing by even more. Harris has made up some ground with the base, but she still has to win these independent swing voters. The election was really close in 2020. And so I think that's an important thing to note for all the enthusiasm, energy, and excitement among the Democrats. That's not going to be enough to get her over the finish line and to get her elected. And so I think the campaign now needs to figure out how do you channel this energy and enthusiasm among Democrats with a lot more money, more volunteers, more people wanting to help. How do you channel that in a way that then leads to winning Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin in November?
And have to figure out how to spend it very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's less than 100 days left. It's a sprint. And I think that's another thing that just next week, she's going to travel to 7 battleground states over 4 or 5 days with her new running mate, whoever he may be.
And we're sure it's a he?
We are, barring some big change, our understanding is that they've whittled the list down to 6 people.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So 6 people, because I've been hearing 3 people, and now you're saying 6. Who are these 6 people?
So our understanding that has sort of made it to this final stage which is interviews with Harris's staff, and then should they all make it to the final round, which is an interview with the vice president herself, Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona, Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky, and J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois.
As we say, the white guy Olympics.
Yes, there's a very clear demographic thing that Kamala Harris is going for. White men who have largely executive experiences, many of them from battleground states or have appeal in those key battleground states.
Which makes sense in terms of complementing the ticket.
Yeah, but I also think an important thing to know, a big part of this decision is not just, is someone going to help me marginally in one state, but I will have to work with them for the next maybe 4 or 8 years. And she doesn't have really close relationships with any of these people. And she knows what it's like to serve as vice president.
Yeah.
So I think that's weighing on her as well.
Well, we're going to know what she's thinking, I think, in the next few days. But as we're here in this moment of suspense, just quickly, who do you guys think, of that list, who do you guys think is the most likely to come out as who she picks?
I am so loath to make political predictions at this point because of everything that's happened over the last month and how crazy it's been.
But I'm forcing you to do it. You got to do it.
I think one of the things that is in the back of my mind, and I imagine is in the back of some of these aides' mind, is you cannot win the White House without winning Pennsylvania. There's no path for Kamala Harris. And polling shows that that is a state that she is struggling in at this point. That leads you to think that Josh Shapiro is an incredibly strong candidate for her because his approval rating is like 61%. And that is unheard of in such a swing state like Pennsylvania. So I think that gives him a huge advantage at this point. I also think that she doesn't know him super well. That being said, she doesn't know a lot of these people well. The person she probably knows the best out of all of the people, those final six, is Pete Buttigieg. He helped prep her in 2020. He played Mike Pence in their mock debates. They've served in the administration together. Chasten, Pete's husband, and Doug, Kamala's husband, are friends. They hang out sometimes. They're doing a fundraiser together.
Well, okay, I would put my money on Buttigieg. I don't know. I feel maybe that's a wild card pick, but
I don't think it will be him, but I don't think he's as much of a afterthought as he has been presented in some of these articles and conversations.
Because of the assumption is that like America's not ready to pick a gay vice president.
With the electing potentially the first female Black and Indian American.
Too much history.
There's a lot of history there. But also when you think about Shapiro, there's some concern about he is a very observant Jew. And that is something that Democrats have some pause over. They are not sure that America is ready to accept what would be 3 Jews in the White House, Doug Emhoff, Josh Shapiro, and his wife, and also renewing a spotlight on Israel and Gaza.
That starts to get more complicated with Shapiro and his support for Israel.
There's some nuance there as well as he's come under some criticism for that. People have pointed out that Mark Kelly and Tim Walz have made very similar comments that he has made about the conflict. But I think his identity, his observance put that a harsher spotlight on that. And so we'll see.
Isaac, what's your guess?
Well, I think the other caution about Shapiro is that he's a first-term governor and he didn't have a real opponent, honestly. I mean, Doug Mastriano spent no money, had no money, and was the least effective of all the extreme MAGA candidates who face planted in the midterms. So, I think that
Shapiro battle tested in that same way.
Well, it's just like if you're doing like a straight Moneyball analysis of like how much he overperforms your average Democrat in a state that matters, like there's a pretty big asterisk on that.
Well, I think it will be mere days until we find out the answer to this question. And when it happens, I'm excited to talk to you guys about what it all means. That's it for today's episode. Isaac and Tyler, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Tyler Pager is a White House reporter for The Post, and Isaac Arnsdorf is a national political reporter covering former President Trump and the MAGA movement. Aaron Blake will be back next week. But in the meantime, if you don't already, subscribe to his Campaign Moment newsletter. You can find the link in our show notes and at postreports.com. So you might be hearing today's episode on Post Reports. And if you are going to want to make sure that you're also subscribed to the Campaign Moment podcast. Today's episode was produced by Laura Benshoff and mixed by Rennie Svirnovsky. It was edited by Lucy Perkins and Mary Jo Murphy. Our team also includes Maggie Penman, Rena Flores, Monica Campbell, Ted Muldoon, Alana Gordon, Ariel Plotnick, Bishop Sand, Sabby Robinson, Emma Talkoff, Sean Carter, Peter Bresnan, Ali Bianco, Trinity Webster Bass, Allison Michaels, Renita Jablonski, and Elahe Azadi. I'm Martine Powers. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here soon.